My dear friends, what are your expectations of God? What do you think God is like? I ask because our gospel passage this morning has a very common interpretation which goes like this. The landowner that planted the vineyard represents God. The tenants are the leaders of Israel who are faithless to the extent of killing God's son. There will come a time when God's patience runs out and the wicked men will suffer a horrible death. I would draw your attention to two things about this interpretation. The first is that God is violent and vengeful. And the second is that this is not Jesus' description of God, but the description given by that religious leadership. And so I want to ask you, what are your expectations of God? What do you think God is like? Do you think that God is violent and vengeful? For if you do, you might be surprised to discover that you are placing yourself in the position of the religious leaders being criticized by Jesus rather than with Jesus himself. After all, what exactly does God actually do after his son is killed? There's no dispute that God is the landowner who planted the vineyard, nor that the wicked tenants are the religious leaders. Yet God does not in fact act in the way that those religious leaders expect him to act. He does not, when Jesus is killed, come down with violent fury and raging vengeance. Instead, his son is resurrected, and his first words are peaceful. What we have here is a challenge to us, to our own expectations of what God is like. Jesus goes on to say, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The stumbling block becomes the foundation of a new community. And what is that stumbling block? The idea that one who is executed on a tree, and therefore considered accursed by God, might actually be the only Son of God. That worldly might does not make right in the sight of God. That God is not the violent creature of our distorted imaginations, but is instead unfathomably and irrevocably loving towards us. In the passage from Philippians that is set for today, Paul sets out his own credentials as a faithful Jewish religious leader, and they're extensive. And then he says that he regards it all as worthless compared to knowing Christ. Paul has moved from the position of one who stumbled over the truth about God's love and initially rejected it, but came eventually to see it as the pearl of great price. We need to do the same deep spiritual work and allow Jesus to unpick all our assumptions about who God truly is. God is Christ-like, and in him there is no un-Christ-likeness at all. We need to follow the same journey, and it will begin by considering the profound strangeness of God. A human landlord might well execute violent vengeance upon the wicked tenants, and human ways of thought see God as simply a larger and more powerful form of the same. It's when we can truly accept who God is that we can see who Jesus is, and then we can go and be like him in our world. Until we meet again. Amen.